On the night of January 27, 1986, a group of engineers spent hours begging their own bosses to stop a launch. They had the data. They had written the warning down months before. They were overruled in a single phone call. The next morning, the Space Shuttle Challenger flew for 73 seconds. This is disaster lens. By 1986, the Space Shuttle was supposed to be routine. That was the whole promise of it. Not a fragile experiment, but a reusable spaceplane that would fly to orbit and back like an airliner again and again, dozens of times a year. NASA had sold the shuttle to the country as ordinary, and to keep that promise, it had to fly often and on schedule. This flight, Mission 51L, carried that promise further than any before it. On board was Krista McAuliffe, a high school teacher from New Hampshire, the first ordinary citizen chosen to fly, the winner of NASA's Teacher in Space program. She was to teach 2 lessons from orbit. Across America, school children were wheeled in front of televisions to watch their teacher become an astronaut. She flew with 6 others: Commander Dick Scobie, pilot Michael Smith, and mission specialists Judith Resnick, Ellison Onizuka, Ronald McNair, and Gregory Jarvis. 7 people and a watching nation. The launch had already slipped several times that week, and the morning it was finally set to fly, January the 28th, Central Florida woke up frozen. Temperatures by the pad had fallen into the 20s overnight. Icicles hung from the launch tower. It was by far the coldest morning any shuttle had ever been asked to fly in. Nothing about that cold was a secret. To understand the warning, you have to understand the rockets. The shuttle was lifted off the pad by 2 enormous solid rocket boosters, tubes of packed fuel, built in segments and shipped from a contractor in Utah called Morton Thiokol. Where those segments joined, the seams were sealed by rubber rings, O-rings, there to contain the searing pressure inside and keep flame from escaping out the side of the rocket. And those O-rings had a problem. On earlier flights, engineers had pulled the spent boosters from the ocean and found the rings scorched and eaten away. Hot gas had begun slipping past the seal. It was worse on the coldest launches because cold rubber goes stiff. A stiff O-ring is slow to spring into the gap it is supposed to fill. The men who built the boosters had watched this happen, flight after flight, and they had grown afraid of it. One of them, an engineer named Roger Boisjoli, had written a memo 6 months earlier. If the joint ever failed, he warned, the result would be a catastrophe of the highest order, the loss of the vehicle and the crew. He was not guessing. He was watching it come. So the night before the launch, with Florida freezing, Thiokol's engineers called an emergency teleconference with NASA. For hours, they laid out their data and gave a recommendation in plain words: do not launch below 53 degrees. The next morning would be far colder than that. They were telling NASA the night before not to fly. NASA pushed back hard. One manager said, "My God, Thiokol, when do you want me to launch? Next April?" Suddenly the contractor was defending the case against its own rocket, with its largest customer leaning on it. Then Thiokol's managers asked for 5 minutes off the line. In that private caucus, one senior manager told another to take off your engineering hat and put on your management hat. They came back on the line and reversed their own engineers. The recommendation was now launch. One of them, Alan MacDonald, refused to sign it. The warning was given, out loud on the record, the night before. And then it was overruled. Launch morning came clear and bitter. Ice teams found the pad coated in it. Still, the count went on. At 11:38 in the morning, Challenger left the pad. It looked perfect. The crowd cheered. Krista McAuliffe's parents watched from the stands. In classrooms across the country, children watched their teacher rise on a pillar of fire. But in the first half-second, before the shuttle had even cleared the tower, something happened that no one watching could see. The cold right-hand joint failed exactly as the engineers had feared. The stiff O-rings did not seal. A puff of black smoke escaped the side of the booster. Hot gas was already leaking out of the rocket. Then came a reprieve no one would understand for years. Burnt material from the fuel packed into the gap and sealed the leak by accident. For about a minute, Challenger flew on as if nothing were wrong. It climbed. It rolled onto its course. It throttled up toward full power. And then it met the strongest winds of the climb. The shudder shook that fragile accidental plug loose. At 58 seconds, a small flame appeared on the side of the right booster. A blowtorch pointed straight at the great external tank, full of liquid hydrogen and oxygen. On the ground, Mission Control gave the routine call. Challenger, go at throttle up. Commander Scobie answered, Roger, go at throttle up. They were the last words from the crew. At 73 seconds, the flame burned through. The tank gave way. In an instant, almost 10 miles up, the shuttle was torn apart by the forces of its own ascent. To the people on the ground, it looked like one terrible cloud unfolding in the sky, with the two boosters flying loose and wild out of the middle of it. For a moment, no one understood. The launch announcer kept his steady voice. The crowd searched the sky, waiting for the shuttle to come flying out of the cloud. It did not. It was not, in the end, the explosion it appeared to be. The crew cabin held together and fell for nearly 3 minutes toward the sea. Some of the crew may have been conscious for part of that fall. That truth is part of why this disaster has never lost its weight. The shuttle program stopped. The country grieved on live television, and a presidential commission was formed to find out how 7 astronauts had died on a clear morning. The commission expected a technical mystery. What it found was worse, because the cause was not a mystery at all. It had been written down, argued over, and overruled the night before. The moment that cracked it open came from a physicist on the panel, Richard Feynman. As NASA officials spoke in careful, cushioned language about probabilities, Feynman took a clamp, holding a piece of O-ring rubber, and quietly dropped it into a glass of ice water on the table. He pulled it out and showed the room. The cold rubber had lost its spring. It did not bounce back. In a few seconds, on national television, he had demonstrated the entire disaster with a glass of ice water, the exact thing the engineers had been warning about for years. The technical cause was simple, a cold O-ring that failed to seal. But the commission found a deeper rot beneath it. NASA had been seeing O-ring damage for years and had slowly redefined it as acceptable, normal, precisely because it had not killed anyone yet. The pressure of the schedule was real. A program sold as routine could not keep standing down. And on the night that mattered most, the people who understood the rockets best had the least power in the room. The engineers said no. Managers, with their biggest customer listening, said yes. Roger Boisjoli, the man who had written the warning, testified to all of it. For telling the truth, he was frozen out of his own company and his industry. He spent the rest of his life speaking to engineering students about a single duty: to say no when the data says no, and to keep saying it. The shuttle did not fly again for 32 months. The booster joints were redesigned from scratch, and NASA finally gave its engineers something they had not truly held on the night of January the 27th: the power to stop a launch. and be heard. Challenger is remembered as the day a space shuttle exploded on live television. But the shuttle did not simply fail. The decision to launch it did. A cold front the night before, O-rings that had been burning through for years, a memo that named the catastrophe in advance, a teleconference where "do not launch" was said out loud, and then reversed. A manager telling an engineer to take off his engineering hat, pull any single one of those links out of the chain, warm the morning, heed the memo, let the engineers know stand, and 7 people come home. The country did not look away from this one. The redesigned boosters, the independent safety oversight, the hard-won rule that the quietest engineer in the room can halt a countdown, all of it was paid for by that flight, because 7 people died proving what a handful of engineers already knew and had already said the night before. Every disaster is a chain. The links are decisions. Pull one out and the chain doesn't form. That is what we are here to study.